Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our Tea Break podcast. I'm joined, as always, by Finn.
Hi guys, welcome back. Just remember, if you would like to see a transcript of the episode, a full transcript with a glossary of terms, so all of the difficult words are highlighted and you can click them and you will see comment section down the side with all of the definitions, along with a quiz as well, all for free if you head to our With Me platform, link in the description. Anyway, Cal, how are you?
I'm good. I'm doing well. I'm enjoying my life in Sao Paulo. I'm enjoying learning a new language, and I'm having a good time. Today, Finn, we're going to get a bit philosophical, aren't we?
We are indeed.
Finn's been reading a few books and wants to share some things from them. So he was telling me about one of them, and it was particularly striking. It stood out because it relates so much to how we perceive language learning. And that quote is, "Progress happens too slowly to notice, but setbacks happen too quickly to ignore." So what did you make of that, Finn?
Yeah, so this is actually in a book called The Psychology of Money, which has nothing to do with learning a language, but most lessons can be transferable and they can relate to different industries, different fields, different subjects. So The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. Very interesting book. I recommend that everyone reads it, especially you, Cal. But so the whole point is that progress is slow. So when you're learning a language, you improve, but realistically, you make small improvements and you make them over a very long time. And setbacks or bad things that happen, they happen very quickly. It might just be one situation, one conversation, and it might just be a mistake. You might know how to perfectly execute the conversation. Let's go with the example of ordering coffee in a coffee shop, and you just have a bad day, you forget some words or you get some words in the wrong order, and then you make a big mistake and you feel embarrassed, you feel like an idiot. Cal, does that ever happen to you with Portuguese when you're trying to do something normal?
All the time, and that's the thing. You can't ignore it. It's a setback that you can't ignore. So yeah, all the time. Like, it's always the most obvious thing as well, and you realize it in your head straight after you've done it. And you can't say to the person you're speaking to, "Oh, I did know that, I swear." It's just because honestly they don't care either way. They can probably understand, but it's more of a pride thing. And it's just annoying, especially if you progress and you have been progressing over a long amount of time, but you feel like you want to see something for your hard work. You want to see yourself progressing and feel yourself progressing. And progress is often something that we don't necessarily notice, but when the mistakes really do stand out to us, it can be really demoralizing. So we have to remember that progress is just such a long process, and you are improving, and you probably wouldn't have noticed that mistake if you hadn't have improved enough to even realize it was a mistake.
Yeah, exactly. And unfortunately for language learners, the most difficult situations are the most common and basic, simple situations. You might spend years mastering grammar, and then you go to order coffee, or maybe you meet someone new for the first time and you just forget everything, or you don't know exactly what to say. And like you said, you you know in the moment, afterwards. You might spend the whole bus ride home thinking about it, and it might ruin your day. It might make you feel like you haven't improved as much as you really have.
Do you, with Spanish, Finn, or Portuguese, do you ever, it's not even grammar, but sometimes do you ever just feel like it's one of those days or even one of those 20-minute periods of conversation where your mouth isn't pronouncing how it should do, and for some reason everything that comes out of it, your accent just sounds really bad, and you don't know why? Maybe it's because you're tired, but do you ever have that?
Yeah, especially after not practicing for a while, it's like it's all in there in your brain, but because you haven't been practicing every day, then your brain moves faster than your mouth can move, and then it makes you look like you don't know how to say anything. It makes you look like you don't know how to speak. Even your accent is kind of slightly off because you're trying to rush to catch up with yourself. And that is definitely an example of it making you feel rubbish, because it's not just one setback. Oh, I forgot this word. I forgot one word when I was ordering coffee. It's like the whole exchange, the whole language communication exchange kind of falls apart.
Yeah, it's that one is stands out for me. I really don't enjoy that one at all, because accent is something I really enjoy when learning a language. I really enjoy listening out for it. I enjoy listening to different accents. I know some of the people in our club do as well, and English is a great one for that, because obviously the classic, as an English speaker living in a foreign country, everyone tells me to say bottle of water, and that's the most obvious one. But if you've studied English more in depth, perhaps, or have more of a deeper interest, there's so many different accents across the UK, which are very, very interesting, very fun, and very different. But if you have a language understanding on that level where you can detect accents and think about how your accent is perceived, it's such a horrible setback, such a horrible kind of mistake to make when your natural accent isn't coming out right, because maybe you're tired, or maybe it's just one of those days, or maybe you haven't practiced. So it's really just remembering when things like this happen, when you do have setbacks, you will obviously notice them, but you have to remember that you are still progressing. The setbacks don't negate all of this progress that you've made. And there's some more advice in that book as well, isn't there, Finn, about how growth works?
Yeah, you've got to think, well, it's the psychology of money. If you think about a chart or investing, there is never in history of any chart a linear progression. It never go. I don't know which way round is. I don't know if my camera is split. It is never just 30 years of continuous straight line growth. You spend most of your time in a recession, I guess, going down. So you go down slowly over long periods of time, but you make huge bits of improvement. Maybe you go on holiday, for example, to an English speaking country. That's 1 week of seriously good improvements. And then over time, maybe you have a little setback, kind of going down, you improve. You have a little setback, you have an off day. You're not going to be perfect every single day. You might be tired. You might forget a word one day. But over time, it's that continuous improvement in an upwards direction. And I think that's the most important thing for everybody to remember, and the most important lesson to take from money, finance, investing, all of those things that you and I are not qualified to talk about.
But we can interpret it in a language learning way. And I'd like to pick up on what you said about maybe you visit an English speaking country for a week. I think so. It definitely that resonated with me because I did a Spanish exchange when I was 15, and I had just got like a D, the equivalent of a D grade in my GCSE mock. And my mum panicked and found a Spanish exchange for me. It wasn't official exchange. She basically found the equivalent of Facebook for exchanges, it was almost like Tinder. You had a profile on there, and your parents would arrange for you to swap children with strangers. And next week I went to Seville for a week and Granada for a week, and none of them could speak any English, the family nor the girl, and my Spanish was poor, very poor. But in those 2 weeks, I not only learned so much of the language and the value of a language's practical use, everyday conversation, but I learned an attitude to language that I think was fundamental, in that the attitude to mistakes. I realized very quickly that if I don't try and speak, nothing is going to happen. If I just sit in my room here and don't speak to anyone, what's that going to do for me? I learned to just roll with the mistakes, ignore the setbacks as much as I could, and try and not feel embarrassed. So each day I'd have very, very bad conversations in Spanish, but I would have them. And by the time I left, I remember doing my GCSE, doing very well, and then coming back the previous year. And then in class, every conversation, every question that was put out to the class that most people would usually not want to put their hand up, I was always very comfortable and happy speaking in that language. And I think a lot of that came from the attitude that I learned of not bothering about mistakes and not worrying about them. Mistakes are still important because you can learn from them, but not worrying about you making yourself feel stupid or making yourself look silly. And not everyone has that opportunity, though, do they, Finn, to go and live in the country where they speak the language that they're learning. But there are other options.
Yeah. Well, that actually brings us on nicely to the second, I guess it's not a quote, but a part that I've taken from a book that I read recently. And that book was The Art of Resilience by Ross Edgley, who was the first person to swim around Great Britain. And he didn't want to touch land the whole time. So he was doing 6-hour shifts, so 6 hours on, 6 hours off, in order to work with the very strong tides that we have around our island. And I can't remember how many days it took him, but it was a lot. And he was more than halfway round, probably about 2/3 of the way round. And he received news that his dad got really bad cancer. He developed this really bad cancer, and he wanted to just immediately cancel the swim and go home. But his brother had passed on a message from his dad saying that he doesn't want him to cancel the swim. The only way he wants to see him is by him finishing the swim and seeing him on the beach at the finish. And the bit that I'm actually talking about, that's just the wider context, sorry, but the bit I'm talking about, is there was a really bad storm and the boat had to take shelter in a harbor for 3 days. And he couldn't go on land because he would break his challenge. So he was just stuck on a tiny boat for 3 days, being annoyed that he couldn't make progress on the swim. But the lesson was to control the controllables and just remember that you cannot control the uncontrollables. So although he could not control the fact that he was stuck in that small harbor on the small boat, he could control how much rest he was getting, his nutrition, his stretching, his not overthinking, so his mental state towards his recovery. So he focused as hard as he could on that, so that when he could go back to swimming, when he could control the controllable of how far he was swimming each day, he could then make more progress than if he hadn't focused on the rest, the recovery, the nutrition, all of that.
Yeah, and I think that ties really nicely to our kind of idea and ethos with Tea Break, and especially our conversation classes. We're talking about, we've both had the privilege and the benefit, me and Finn, of having been able to travel to different countries in which they speak the language that we have been learning. And not everyone has that luxury, has that benefit, and it's out of their control, right? The ability to get a plane ticket to the UK, get a visa in 10 seconds to the US, wherever, is not something that everyone has in their control. But we'd hope, and we structure the club in this way, that most people, or a majority of people, can access the internet on their phone or their laptop or their iPad or their computer, whatever, and they can subscribe to Tea Break English Club, and they can have conversations at a low, reasonable price with 2 native speakers online. And that is something you can control, and is something that is would be highly beneficial for your English language journey.
Yeah, exactly. We want to make the club as accessible and affordable as possible, so that it is a controllable for you guys to control. So before we go down a rabbit hole of promoting the club too much again, I think we should finish up here. I think it's a good place to finish.
Yeah, that was a nice natural ending. So it's been a pleasure, Finn, as always.
Yeah, good to speak to you again.
Lovely. Right, until next week.
Yeah, until next week, or maybe even in a few days' time, if you're lucky. Oh.
Okay,
All right,
see you.
good to see you. See you later.
Bye-bye.